That's fine.
Okay.
Well, it's really, really good to see you here, friends. And this came about because Mark and I were involved in a conversation. If we haven't met before, then let me introduce myself. I'm Jonathan, and I am a pastor in a church in Northeast London. And I'm also one of the administrators of a Facebook group for Baptist ministers where a conversation began.
And I'm Mark. I'm Mark Elder. I'm the pastor of St. Peter's Baptist Church in Worcester. And I also am part with Andy Glover, who's on the screen, of the Fresh Streams National Leadership Team, with a bit of an interest, or certainly an interest in theology. And we picked up on this conversation about Resource Church, which is why we're doing what we're doing today.
It really is. We're really, really blessed as well that we were able to invite some great friends to join us. Mark, why don't you introduce somebody first? Go on.
Yeah, let's introduce our guests. Firstly, I'm going to introduce Simon Goddard. I'm sure we'll see a picture of, you can see Simon on screen. Simon is a Baptist Together Pioneer Ambassador and the director of Rivertree. Simon, just say a little bit about what your sort of day job normally consists of.
Yeah, I have a portfolio ministry, so I work in a number of ways. One of those is, as you say, as a pioneer ambassador for the Baptist Together. I do a day a week as a mission enabler within the Eastern Baptist Association, where I used to be a regional minister, and do a couple of days with Fresh Expressions nationally as well.
Thank you. It's great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you for that. And I want to introduce you to Paul Harcourt, who I am doubly blessed for. Paul is a local friend. His church is about a mile away from my house. But Paul, it's not because we're friends that we've invited you. Tell us just a brief introduction to you.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. Hi, everybody. So I'm Paul Harcourt. I am also church leader in London by about 500 yards. So right on the London-Essex border. And I lead a church called All Saints Woodford, Wales. I'm also, though, national leader for New Wine, which is not exclusively Anglican. We really value all those members of New Wine who are not Anglicans, but in practice, 2/3 of New Wine is Anglican by leaders, churches, or delegates to summer conferences. So I'm also leading a resource church here as well, so get to speak a little bit from that perspective today as well.
Brilliant, thank you,
Paul. That is some pile of books you've got there behind you. Are they the ones you're supposed to be reading, or?
Yeah, I joke that nowadays I'm a bit like the SAS when it comes to reading books, like in and out as quickly as possible without anybody noticing.
Okay, it's impressive. Ali Boulton, it's great to welcome Ali to our gathering this afternoon. Ali, just say a little bit about the work that you do as well.
Okay, so I'm a pioneer practitioner on a local housing estate. I do that for a little bit of my time now. I live by faith, a bit like Simon, do a whole variety of things, including also being a Baptist Pioneer Ambassador, co-founded with Penny Marsh the New Housing Hub, and do lots of stuff around new housing. Yeah. And I'm just about to start working for CMS a day a week, lecturing in pioneering and theology.
Just explain to us what a Baptist Pioneer Ambassador is, because I'm not quite sure.
Okay, well, there's three of us. You've got Simon and me here, and there's also Roy Searle.
Yeah.
And the three of us were doing various things, nurturing, pioneering within the Baptist family. And as part of that, they kindly kind of said, come and be sort of recognised in that. And so the three of us do various things, including gathering the round table, putting together a pioneer manifesto. I probably missed out loads of things, Simon, for which I apologise, but it's nurturing pioneers and pioneering within our Baptist family.
Okay, cheers, thank you.
Thanks, Ali. It's great that you're here. We really appreciate you coming. And Yinka's here as well. Yinka Oyekan, who is, we'll let people introduce themselves. He's a great friend and an inspiring guy. So Yinka, why don't you just take a minute to introduce yourselves to us?
Yeah, it's great to be here and to see so many friends. So my background really is church planting. I'm based here in Reading at the Gate. Before I got to Reading, my wife and I, Fiona, pioneered over 22 churches, I believe it was. by the time we got to Reading. So I'm a practitioner when it comes to pioneering churches. I'm actually picking one up at the moment that we're having to revive. I've also got a real heart for evangelism, as many of you will know. In fact, we're hoping to launch our mission to England in September this year. And I'm hoping at the end of the presidency of the BU to put aside 100 days to travel around the country doing evangelistic events in different churches. So a real heart for church planting, a real heart for evangelism. And great to be here today.
Thank you. And just two things. You mentioned presidency there, and you are coming towards the end of your presidential year as the president of Baptist Together. So that's great to have you with us. But also, do you want to just say, I mean, I think we're going to get a bit later on thinking about what happens when a church comes into our area, but I think there'll be some similar conversation about what happens when a large mission activity happens in our area. Do you want to just tell us a bit about the turning and what that is?
Yeah, no, so the turning, latest expression of it, as I like to talk about, was in Switzerland, where we had something like, I think, 1,200 people respond to the gospel in the space of a couple of weeks, involving many denominations. And we were told by, including the Salvation Army, and we're told that a quarter of them, 5 months later, were in discipleship or in church. So the turning is an evangelistic street mission that's taken us about 4 years to learn how to get right. But it's really exciting just to see churches come alive. And when it happened here in Reading, it had a huge impact on the town, not just within the church, but outside of the church itself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Yinka. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Yinka. Okay, I want to introduce Aaron, who has a second name the same as mine. And that's because he's my son. But I thought it would be really good to have somebody on this afternoon who's actually working in a church plant. So Aaron, just explain to us what you do and a little bit about your church plant.
Yeah, so I'm in Edinburgh. I'm in Scotland, and I lead a local church that is a church plant. So I'm both a Baptist minister and a church planter. And so I think that's why I'm in this conversation, not simply because it's a nice chance for me and my dad to catch up and to see each other during the working week, but yeah, that's, I guess, what I do. I also, I guess, have more and more desire to help other people plant churches in local communities. And so I'm part of something called Forge, which is a pioneer training cross-denominational organisation that I help to organise and lead in Scotland and in Ireland. And so I'm basically everywhere but England. And so I don't know what it's like to be where you are, except for the first 18 years of my life.
Yeah, we've noticed. It's great to see you. Great to welcome you. And,
hi, Aaron. We're really glad that you're here. And I thought it'd be fun to get your dad to introduce you. I wondered what he'd say. And he was far less embarrassing than I might be when my son does this with me one day. And then we're really, really grateful. I was talking with Paul and I said, Paul, it'd be really good if we had somebody who's done this in terms of the resource church thing. And Paul said, there's this guy called Ben. And I trust Paul greatly. So I immediately introduced Ben. And then when I did my background research on Ben, I discovered that he's from God's country. And now I used to think that, you know, some people argue with me about this. I've met a number of Jamaicans who say that Jamaica is God's country. Having visited there, I know that that's where God spends his winter. You know, he's in Jamaica for the winter, but definitely he's from God's country. Ben, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, my name is Ben. I'm from Beverley. Jonathan and I have just discovered that we went to the same secondary school, Beverley Grammar School, which is a joy. Currently, I am leading a church called St Thomas's in Newcastle, which is unlike Paul, whose church has transitioned to being a resource church since resource churches have come into being. We've planted a brand new church, which is 17 months old now. So we launched in October 2019. So we planted from St Michael the Belfry in York with the support of New Wine. So a team of 32 of us moved from York to Newcastle, and with some SDF money, some strategic development funding money from the Church of England, to start a brand new church in the city centre of Newcastle. We've actually ended up planting into an old church building which had a dying congregation. So that's been an absolute joy, and it's been quite a first 18 months really, because for the majority of our time as a church we've been in a pandemic and lockdown, so that's been interesting. But the Lord has done some wonderful things and has opened up some amazing avenues and doors for us to do mission and ministry across the region, which has been fantastic. I also work with Paul on the national leadership team of New Wine.
Thank you for that. So that's our guests. Roger Sutton may well drop in at some stage, but there's a lot going on for Roger right now. So if Roger doesn't make it, then please do pray for us, for him, sorry, that he couldn't be with us. Friends, as though we do want to give time today for some conversation to be taking place and for some questions. We won't be able to hear a question from everybody, but if you were to put any questions that you have as we go along inside the chat, then David Fleming is going to be watching that chat. I'll keep an eye on it, and Mark will as well, as much as we can. But if we kind of see some themes emerging or pick up on some questions, that's where we'll pick up on the questions from. What we wanted to do as a beginning is to start with this model that provoked the conversation. And the conversation happened because somebody shared a story in that group of knowing an area where a resource church has turned up and basically asked the question, look, here's this new church. They've got 5 million to spend over the next few years. How does somebody compete with that? That was the question. And so that leads to a really, really interesting dialogue that made us say, well, let's have that conversation together. And so we reached out to Paul, and I thought it'd be really helpful for us to begin with some kind of an understanding of what is this resource church idea? What's the strategy? What's the intention behind it? Paul said he'd be up for sharing some of that with us. So Paul, I want to hand over to you for a few minutes just to kind of introduce us to that and just to give us a sense of what's happening with that.
Great. Well, thanks, Jonathan. I suppose at one level, every church is a resource church. I was asked a few years ago to write an article on being a resource church. And because I've been trained in new wine, I just said, I don't know I can write that article, because for me, the essence of the kingdom of God is if you want more, you give away what you've got. And so every church that has that heart is always wanting to give away, not to compete, but to cooperate. But resource church has had a particular coinage and meaning in the Church of England. And it's to do with a strategic shift that the church has made in its financing of ministry. So just going back a few years, I think everybody would know the Church of England is increasingly struggling to maintain its parish system of a ministry in every place. And one of the challenges that was often pointed out was that quite often that funding system was essentially managing decline, and churches were being supported by stipends and salaries being given, and yet the ministry wasn't turning around. There's also a lot of people think that the Church of England is this big centrally controlled organization, which it really isn't. Church of England in some ways is a bit like the United States of America, where each diocese is like a separate state and has huge amounts of power, and the national church can't do that much about it. What the national church does have, though, is it has the ability to channel money in different ways to those dioceses. And that was the mechanism that the General Synod of the Church of England seized upon. So in order to do something about what seemed to be an inevitable decline, the church took the funding model that they had before, which was known as Darlow funding, an arcane kind of formula that said how much you got based on models of deprivation and things like that in your area. And they said, we're going to take that money and we're going to split it in two. Half of it is going to continue to go to dioceses based on their lowest income communities. And that's called link funding, LINC. The other half, we're going to put aside and we're going to call it strategic development funding. And we're going to use that to sponsor new initiatives, which will be the planting of new churches or the revitalization of existing churches. And that will enable us to have a bit of control over targeting either areas where the church is not really making headway. And they looked initially at the big city centres where there were very young and very mobile populations, but where the church's reach was very weak. Or we're going to look at areas where ministry is not working and needs to be done in a very different kind of way. And so they came up with this concept of strategic development funding. And Ben and I live in a world where SDF is really important. And if you hear about a church that's been parachuted into a city centre that has £5 million to spend, that's an SDF fund. What would happen is that the diocese will have made a bid to the national church. The national church would have looked at that, decided whether or not it's a strategic area for mission, will have got some of that SDF fund money and contributed it across. 5 million doesn't go as far as you think, because often what they will do is they will put all the salaries and stipends, all the housing costs, all of that will be rolled into that. So it might well be that a big chunk of it is gone just in funding ministry for 5 years. which when you're planting a new church from scratch or from a very small base, may well be, you know, the 5 years, perhaps you might not be able to get very far in that time. Some churches have done really well, but all of those bids are under huge pressure to make sure that they are moving to be self-sustaining within a few years. So there's a number of different types of resource churches that go on. And there are resource church initiatives which are very different from the model that we started with. So, for example, the Manchester Diocese has the Antioch network, where the aim is to plant lots of small estate churches, small churches that will never become very big, but will hopefully multiply rapidly. And the aim is to plant 20 or 30 estate churches, very local, probably 30 to 50 people maximum. But to multiply those through areas that the Church of England certainly isn't reaching, and often other denominations don't have a presence in either. Then there are churches which are being planted, like Ben's, where in Ben's case, a significant number of people sacrificially decided to move city. That's quite unusual. Often it would just be a leader or two who will be going into a place, but there'll be an external transplant going into a church that's either closed or threatened with closure. And then you also have churches like my own one, which is already a large church and has been designated as a resource. And the idea is that in all of those cases, some preferential treatment is being given to that church in terms of their funding, their ability to have, in the Anglican context, curates, for example, with the quid pro quo that from those to whom much has been given, much will be required. In other words, we're going to fund you, but we absolutely expect you not just to plant this church, but to plant churches that will plant churches and to create a pipeline. And I think in some ways, one of the best ways of looking at whether or not this has been a good thing overall for the kingdom is to say, we don't know yet. We don't know. We know that some of these churches planted into city centres particularly have devastated other local congregations, and all they've done is they've just sucked up believers into one place. On the whole, new churches that have been planted have actually reached new people, though, and I think where the model will be proven or proven to have failed will be whether these churches will plant churches that will plant churches. So in other words, we probably need to take our hands off and do the kind of Gamaliel approach and say, if this is of God, we will find out soon enough. If it's not, that will also become very evident very quickly. Now, Ben's going to tell the story of St. Thomas, Newcastle. And you can imagine that if you're in the position, even within your own denomination, there's quite a lot of hostility and resentment to the singling out of certain churches and the giving of more resources. So it's not an easy position to be in. What we've had in Woodford, in North East London, is that over the years, as the largest church in the diocese, we've increasingly been asked to take on responsibility for other churches where ministry wasn't sustainable. And when I became national leader of New Wine about 4.5 years ago, I split my time 50% between the local church and 50% New Wine. At the time I took over, I was actually leading 2 churches. Now I'm leading 7. And so we're constantly being asked to take on more and more responsibility for churches that the Church of England wants to maintain ministry in that area or that parish or in that building, but the congregation that's there can't support themselves. And so there is a lot being asked of these SDF churches. An example of what that looks like is actually just down the road from Jonathan. So we've got Abby on the line with us today. So Abby Todd came to my church, All Saints Woodford Wells, as one of my curates. And just over a year ago, she moved with 15 to 20 people from the congregation to Holy Trinity South Woodford, about 50 yards down the road from Jonathan's church at Woodford Baptist, and is revitalising that. Now, in her case, all of the money that was promised to back her up has not materialised. And so I think in some ways this big SDF funding pot is going to become a bit rarer. There are a lot of places where the resource church model will not come with these millions or even these hundreds of thousands, which is what we were hoping for. And so that it will be quite a different model as we go forward. maybe just a final thing to trail, and we can pick up later. New Wine, as I said, is not exclusively Anglican, but in New Wine we are committed to church planting, and we have a number of church planting hubs across the country where churches that have experience in this are offering support and help to any church that is revitalizing or planting. And some of those planting hubs are not Anglican, so like Woody's in Bristol and places like that. So I think probably we'll finish at that point and hand over.
That's great. No, I think that's really wonderful. And just a little teaser at the end then that New Wine might sponsor some Baptist church plants. That's a really good news.
Yeah, absolutely.
You heard it here first.
Depends what you mean by sponsor, Jonathan.
Well, we all know what we mean by sponsor, and it involves folding stuff. Anyway, it's Paul, so grateful for that. Somebody has asking the question, I'm just looking at the questions down here. How long has that program, the SDF program, been running?
That's a really good question. I'm not entirely sure. I think probably we're talking about 5 years. Ben might know slightly better.
Yeah.
As in the Church of England, everything moves slowly.
Okay.
The review process that Yinka's asking about is an ongoing process. So the 7 churches that I have some responsibility for, let's see. So of the 7 churches, 5 of them are revitalisation or churches that are in our own parish. 1 of them is a funded SDF bid into new housing where there was no ministry of any type before. And that one I can speak about with great confidence because I know that they are now getting very regular review, a lot of targets that they would have to hit, in other words, for that money to be considered well spent.
Thank you. I'm just adding Ben in here. Ben, we're going to come to some questions in a minute. A lot of people wanting to ask about the impact, but I just want to get a kind of a grassroots story. Then, friends, that's what we're going to push into next is, you know, what conversation is there going on in resource churches about the impact on the areas in terms of the other churches. But just tell us a bit about St. Thomas's, and we just had explained to us from Paul a sense of what the model is and how it works out. From living it out there, not as somebody that was designated an existing church, but beginning, tell us a bit of the story there, and especially what is there that said in the process to you about networking with others and about, you know, whatever impact and moderating impact or networking, all that kind of stuff as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So, yeah, as I said earlier, we're right in the heart of Newcastle. A team of us, 30, moved from St Michael Belfry in York up here. We made the decision before St Thomas's launched. We moved about 9 months before the launch of the church, Ellie and I, and the rest of the staff team and planting team moved over the next 9 months. That we were absolutely committed as St Thomas's to 5 things really in our mandate as being the diocesan resource church. The first was to support the bishop and her vision for the diocese, and we'd filter everything through the diocesan vision. Secondly, that we'd release resources for mission and ministry wherever we could around the diocese and wherever that invitation was extended. Thirdly, that everything that we did would be about building teams to send across the diocese. Fourthly, to develop new leaders. And fifthly, as Paul just said, I think a resource church only becomes a resource church when we plant churches. So those were like the 5 things that we said we wanted to define us as a resource church. Now, obviously, that's not our mission statement or vision statement. It's very clunky. It's a bit neat than that, but they're the things that we committed to as the diocesan resource church. And so when we were thinking about planting, very early on we were thinking, where can we resource mission and ministry in parts of Newcastle that might be open to us resourcing mission and ministry. So that was we were thinking about that. I'd say even before we began to launch. And it was extraordinary, really, because on the one hand, we had some churches inviting us to go and plant into their buildings before we'd even planted St Thomas's. Before we'd even planted St Thomas's, people were saying, "Please come and take our church building," or "Please can you come and plant into our church?" So we had that all the way to other church leaders, and I've got to say, particularly Anglicans, telling us that sometimes using these words, often not, that we weren't welcome to go back to York. This was never going to work, etc. So I'd say we experienced both of that. So we experienced great welcome, relief that something was coming that might be able to resource mission and ministry across the diocese. I think we were very open with the fact we didn't want to keep all of our resources just in the city centre. We genuinely want to do stuff across the diocese, all the way through to evangelicals aren't welcome here. This won't work unless it's liberal Catholic, all of that kind of thing. But in answer to your question, Jonathan, about how we thought about networking with other churches, I'd say because of the 5 priorities that we set ourselves, we were just committed to trying to work with anybody that would work with us. If you're going to plant new churches, or even begin to resource mission and ministry in a church that isn't your own, or in a different part of the city or diocese, you've got to be willing to partner with other people. And so we did try to build partnerships, and I'd say relatively early on in our life as a resource church, some of those have begun to pay off. So there's a very poor part of the city of Newcastle called Vicar. You may know it from Vicar Grove or Anton Deck. That's about 1.5 miles away from St Thomas's. Our youth worker in particular started to do detached youth work with a team of university students from St Thomas's in the city centre that go down to Vicar. And that's continued all the way through the pandemic and through the lockdown, working with the local police. And our Associate Minister, Lee Kirkby, has been working with the diocese and the church leaders in Vicar and Walker to get an Eden team off the ground that we're planting in September. So that's been wonderful fruit of partnership there. We're currently, in the 2nd, 3rd week of January, I just put on Facebook that we would be willing to pay for and run Alpha for any church in the diocese that wanted to run Alpha online. Within about 2 minutes of me putting this on Facebook, the bishop shared it. And 4 weeks ago, we launched an Alpha course with 11 or 12 other churches in the diocese. So, we all come together in one big Zoom call. We're going to have breakout rooms, across the for different parishes, different churches in the region. So that's all been very fruitful, and I think it's because we've been committed to saying that the resources that we've been given aren't just for St Thomas's. We genuinely want to resource mission and ministry across the diocese and to see God's kingdom come. We did have some tricky moments, I'd say, before we launched, when people did think St Thomas's, forgive me, this is Anglican stuff now, but St Thomas's is basically a free church in Anglican clothing, and it's really come here just to sheep steal and to hoover up every believer from that isn't at St Thomas's and just pile them into one church. So we did have some of that, and lots of questions from other people about why do you get all of the money? Did the Church of England not trust us? Did the Church of England not trust any of us in the region, and so they've got to parachute in somebody from another city in order to fix the problem. None of that, of course, is true. So the language that we try to use a lot at the beginning and still do use is that we're just coming to join in with what God is already doing. And since we've launched, people seeing some of the fruit of what we're doing that isn't just in the city centre has really helped change the narrative that people have had in their minds about what a resource church is. But that's been some of our experience. In terms of the question that Yinka asked about reviewing, our project at St Thomas's, I think, was about 4.3 million of SDF money, which is a lot of money. A lot of that was the majority of that is going on a building project, which we're currently in the middle of, and HR costs, so staffing costs, planting curates, that kind of thing. But we do have to work hard to justify that money. So every month I have to sit in a review meeting where we have to submit our numbers on number of new people to church, number of new givers, number of new converts, number of baptisms, number of people exploring vocation, number of new people in small groups, number of new givers, number of new people serving on teams, number of new leaders in teams across the church. And me and Lee, my associate, have to sit through that every single month and submit all of those numbers to our project manager and strategy manager in the diocese, who then feed it back to the national church and the church commissioners. So there is a lot of expectation placed on resource church leaders.
Can I just interject there, Ben and Paul? Really, just a question to sort of get out of the way while we're on this subject, because you both alluded to this notion of the frustration of other churches that have been there a long time, historical churches, many of them, and you're sort of hoovering some of the fruit that they've been involved in and working hard on at the coalface for a long time. Is that a fair criticism, do you think?
I'd say of some churches, you've probably all got experiences of churches coming into an area and lots of transfer growth happening. I'd actually say at St Thomas's we've had very, very little. the majority of, I'm old at St Thomas's. The majority of our congregation, the average age of somebody at St Thomas's is about 20, 21. Mainly university students, a lot of them new to faith. We've maybe had 2 or 3 people, 3 or 4 max, move over from other churches. I'd say it's not been true in Newcastle, but I have heard, but I can't say with any certainty, but I have heard from other people that are ministering where resource churches come in that has not been the case.
I mean,
yeah,
if I can
maybe
just
if we,
comment. Sorry, I would just and then over to Paul, just to comment that I can see it both ways. I was in Newcastle for 10 years, actually, at the pastor at Heaton Baptist Church. And so I know a little bit about the church scene there. And I can imagine, for instance, at St Luke's, a mile down the road from you, who are working with students, that was probably a challenge.
I'd say St Luke's. I can remember when I was appointed the leader of the resource church, and they I kind of was unveiled at like a diocesan synod meeting. It's like the new resource church leader, and we got a lot of aggro at that meeting. And the leader of St Luke's at the time, Robert Ward, stood up and he cried, and he said, I've been praying for this day for 40 years. And he said it's the best news that this diocese has had, that Ben and a team from York are coming to plant into Newcastle, and they've been nothing but amazing.
Well, I'm encouraged by that.
Mm.
I mean, in Worcester, where I am, there's a resourcing church, in the sense, a great church, and their lead minister is a good friend of mine. But I mean, if I'm being brutally honest, I could say that 10 of my people, good people, leadership people, ministry leaders, have left us and joined them in the last year for a variety of reasons, some of which is nothing to do with this conversation that we're having. But I mean, I'm just trying to sort of be honest about the engagement with other pastors and leaders. Perhaps, Paul, you could shed some light on how we can overcome and move from this sort of competition to working in a collaborative way together.
Well, I think when you touched on it, really, it's all about relationship. And Ben's done a really good job of relationship. One of the things that really helped, I suppose, in Newcastle is that Robert Ward was also part of the New Wine Network.
Yeah.
And so there's a sort of sense of kingdom already. Where it's particularly difficult is where either the leaders who are coming in don't put the work in, coming in humbly, asking questions, making connections, getting alongside what is going on. Ben said our job is to come in and join in with what God is already doing, which is absolutely the right approach. So where it's not been done well, either because leaders haven't put the work in, or sometimes because the majority churchmanship in that area is very different. And so, you know, you can put the work in, but it's really hard because people think if you're evangelical, you are definitely therefore homophobic, for example. You know, and I know Ben has had to deal with a lot of that in what is a traditionally very liberal diocese. But it's all about relationship. I mean, I've actually had a church plant of an independent charismatic church into my own parish the last few years. But they did it brilliantly. They came and saw me. They moved in a guy called Nigel Langford, who you might know, Bible Society church. He's church partnerships leader for the Bible Society, and we've just become great friends. So he's planted a church just on the edge of my parish, as it happens. In 5 years, he's grown it from 6 people to 120, and they're planting down the central line in Woodford. And we work really closely together because his model is a brilliant model for replicating small church. But I think we got off on the right foot because we didn't see each other as competitors or a threat. And where people have moved from our church to his, or eventually from his church back to us, we've just blessed that and stayed in good relationship with each other.
Yeah. Can I mean, I'm going to open it up for some wider questions in just a moment as we drill into this, but one question that sort of seems to me to be the holy grail for everybody on this screen at the moment is conversion growth. We want to see people come into faith in Jesus Christ. And I don't know whether it's too early to say, but I would be interested to know, looking at this model that we're talking about, how successful in terms of measuring that as a sort of key way of looking at whether this has been successful or not.
Yeah, I think if you look into the research, I put a link into the chat. Have a look at it later. Nationally, I think the research, this is a bit of time ago now, suggested that only about 38% of people were transferring. Now, to be honest, 38% of people is really painful. It shouldn't be anybody, but we know that people move between churches all the time, and we know also that people have a tendency to go to whatever's new in town. So that I think we're never going to achieve zero.
No.
I think obviously Ben is picking up people who are new, but there would have been a Christian population coming to Newcastle for university who wouldn't have looked at, if St Thomas's wasn't there, they'd have gone to other churches. So other churches will feel the impacts from that as well. So we can't get away from that. Same happened to me with Hub Church Woodford when they planted just down the road from us. You know, there were people moving new to the area who probably wouldn't have settled with us as a result, where they would have done in the past. There is a slight difference again between what network is planting. So some of the networks that are planting are very much we used the word parachuting early on, and they're connected perhaps to Holy Trinity Brompton, and their connection is quite loose because geographically it will be to do with the Alpha course. Ben and I both come from within the New Wine Network, which tends to mean that we do, like as in the case of St Luke's Newcastle, we do already have a local new wine presence. And so one of our strengths that we try and offer in these conversations is that this will often be perhaps a bit more grassroots than some of the main city centre targeted planting. I think HDB have done a fantastic job in some places, and they would be the first to admit that they've learnt lessons in other places where they didn't do it in the best way.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you want to pick up on some of the chat box questions at this point?
Thank you. There have been a few questions, really. I mean, I think there's a few questions around, you've touched on it a little bit there, but there was a question earlier about that list of things, Ben, that you were talked about being assessed on. I'm going to bring you back into the chat if we can. Can we highlight Ben as well? And you know, I was interested to read that list of things that you were being assessed on each month. And I guess there were some questions there about that interesting list. That must be tough on you. Perhaps a question mark about, alongside that, you know, is anybody asking how many poor people get fed? How many, you know, homeless people get ministered to? How many people are moving out of debt? How many people get healed? How many people get set free from the demonic? You know, I mean, is there any of that stuff in that list as well? Or is it really the hard drilled down, bums on seats, cash in the tray kind of thing?
I'd say it can feel, Jonathan, like the latter of what you just described. However, I think the thing for us to realise is the only reason we're counting that stuff is so that we can do the former things that you've just mentioned. I don't, if I'm being honest, I don't really feel the pressure of it. And I try and not share, Lee and I try and not share the pressure of the targets with the rest of the staff team, because I think if we do what Jesus has called us to do in Newcastle, it'll all be fine. Maybe that's a bit naive. We're currently doing that. We're ahead of all of our targets at the minute. So I'm not, maybe I'm just being lulled into a false sense of security. I don't know. But I personally don't feel the pressure. I can see how the longer it goes on, you might feel the pressure that, oh my gosh, it's all just about bums on seats, or it's all just about making sure that we're financially sustainable after 5 years. The thing that I have to keep telling myself is that the reason that we're counting this is because we want to be training a certain number of people, because we've got a vision to plant a certain number of churches across the region. Yes, I think you just have to keep in mind the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's helpful. And there's been a question that's I'm trying to collect some questions together here really into one. I mean, maybe that you can't answer this or Paul can't, but you talked about parachuting in, you've talked about a particular model of church. So I guess there's a background question coming out of some of these others, which is, are they all evangelical churches? Is it that there's a perceived failure of the churches in that area, which means it needs a church? So there's this conversation, it needs a new church. Who is it that's deciding, and upon what basis? Is it that churches in that area are failing? And when the Anglicans take a look, the Anglicans specifically take a look and say, we want to put a plant there, is there any consideration of what's happening in other churches in that neighborhood? So for example, did anybody look at the other non-Anglican churches in Newcastle and say, it's fine, they're covering it, we can just go and encourage that? Or was there a sense of, the Anglican church there is weak, or it isn't evangelical, so we should put one there? So there's a bit of that conversation. I don't know whether that's something you can speak to or not.
Yeah, and I think I probably can. So in our case here in Newcastle, the diocesan bishop Christine Hardman basically decided that she wanted a resource church in the city centre of Newcastle. There are some amazing churches in Newcastle. Hillsong do a fantastic job. Heaton Baptist has already been mentioned. City Church, Jesmond Parish Church, which is a very conservative Anglican church. They're all doing a fantastic job. The reality is in the metro.
That was great understatement there, I have to say, Ben. I love that.
Yeah. But in the context of where we are, Newcastle in the metro area has 1 million people. It is a huge urban area that sprawls for Newcastle, Sunderland, basically indivisible with it's just one big urban sprawl up the coast, up to Whitley Bay. It's a huge urban sprawl, and church attendance is very low. In fact, in the Church of England, 1 in every 10 people in the diocese was found to be worshipping in one church, which was Jesmond Parish Church. And so churches are doing a fantastic job. I think the diocese saw that there was an opportunity for some funding to get some resourcing of mission and ministry off the ground. And we just need more. I would never complain if there was churches being planted, because it's just more opportunity for mission and ministry. And we're very clear that we only ever do what the bishop wants us to do. So we just submit to the diocesan leadership. They wanted a resource church. We just come in to do what God has called us to do and what they've asked us to do.
Thanks for that. I really appreciate that. I think we could be digging into this for a very, very long time. And I just love that we're going to finish on that moment there, just with this section, which is, we do what the bishop tells us to do. And we may have just struck on a real key issue for us as Baptists. There's lots of comments here about our independence and interdependence and the lack of it and that kind of stuff. I just want to acknowledge that Roger Sutton, I think, has come into the room. If we can get a spotlight on him.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Roger, it's great to see you. Can we get a spotlight on him? There we are. Roger, great to have you with us. We're so delighted that you're here.
I'm sorry I joined late, Jonathan.
No, honestly, it's just really, really good that you're here. Can you just give us a quick introduction to you for just a few seconds so we get a sense? There'll be people in the room who you haven't met yet, I guess.
I'm sure there are. A Baptist minister, led Altrincham Baptist for 22 years. Now, the last 10 years, been working with Gather and Movement Day to look at church unity across towns and cities, working towards the transformation. It's all about the building the relationships, a prayer base, and then being missional together.
Thank you. And Roger, it's a good time for you to be here, because I think we want to move the conversation into now in an area, how can we build some networks that mean when a resource church comes, it's done in a healthy way. We talked to the subtitle for this is companions, not competitors. And so I want to bring in a number of people into this part of the conversation. Don't go away, Roger, just stay there. But I want to add in Ali and Yinka as well, as people who have been doing some of this work, finding networks. Simon, going to add you in as well. So there's a number here in the middle. And I don't know who wants to jump in first, but if we were to think about how we might build networks, or how we might think more strategically as a network of churches in an area, so that, instead of having this resource church comes and our immediate reaction is, oh my goodness, they're coming to steal my flock. What might we do differently, or how might we build differently that gets some of that kind of bigger city vision, works collaboratively, builds an environment in which we become companions and not competitors? And I don't know who, we haven't scripted this at all. This is a conversation. So I don't know who feels like they want to jump in first.
But if I might just say, firstly, that there are a lot of cities now and towns which are working cooperatively together. So we're tracking 140. I think it's getting to the tipping point now where most cities and towns have some form of organized, prayerful, missional unity. So it's already happening. And when something new happens in a place, if there is something organized, I think it does give the right context to have the conversation, because the conversation is about the future of the town or the city in God. And that's the conversation. It's the missional conversation. And if God is calling someone else to be here, that's great, because there's a lot of people to reach. There's a lot of poor people to help and so on. And when it works well, then it works well. When it doesn't work well is with any context, actually, where somebody comes in and I suppose can be seen to ignore history, can be seen to not honor what God is already doing in a place. So, by far the more mature way is to for the person coming in and for the group receiving them to, form that relationship, used to have coffees together, but now we have Zooms, and to, have a real conversation about the history, the context, and how can we support you, and what are you going to bring? That's the mature conversation. If it's about empire building, then it can degenerate very quickly.
Thank you. Ali, Simon, I don't know if you want to jump. Yinka was just going to jump in across him, which means I'm in his bad books. Okay, Yinka, and then Ali, Simon, reflections on this from our perspective and from both of you, your own experience of this?
Yeah, no, I really, really appreciate what Ben has done, because I think the real pain on the ground, because Roger's right, there's a lot of unity work going on right across our nation, a lot of people working together, so that's got to be good. It's better than before anyway, and actually welcoming Catholics into their myth as well, which is really significant. I would say what Ben has done is significant. I think somebody like a father or a mother in the city like Robert approving and negotiating also helps, but there is a question I have. 38% is a high number. Did I hear that number right? 38% leaving other churches to join a resource church. I think there needs to be, Paul and Ben need to think about how can other denominations have conversations with them when things are not going well on the ground. So what are the access points? How can those conversations happen on the ground? Because it's those things that break unity.
Thank you. Ali.
Thanks. Thank you, Paul and Ben, for giving us your time to explain about all this. So for those who don't know me, I'm on a new housing estate. I've been here 12 years. We moved in to incarnationally love, bless and serve the community here and see what emerges. And what emerged from that is, after a year, the community beyond the church asked us, we thought we were church right from the beginning. There's a whole theological conversation there. I'm struggling a bit with the conversation about equating gatherings with what church is. So my view of church is not, and we all sort of think this, but I just want to put that out there. I know I'm not the only person who thinks this. I'm sort of struggling a bit with the people who gather being the church as opposed to all the other people. Some of our people who've come to faith from non-church backgrounds will never gather with us. We pray and they're growing in different ways. But we were asked by the people beyond the church to start a gathering while we were here. So that's kind of like where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a slightly different background of not starting with planting church and seeing what that does, but starting with people, seeing if a church emerges. But interestingly, to this conversation, into our housing estate moved lovely Joel and Kath Sales, who I know Ben knows, who are the resource church leaders in Swindon, and they live on our estate. And interestingly, I get the competition thing, but we are not in competition at all, because our vision of what God has called us to do is so completely different. If there's people in our estate who would go to the resource church, love them, bless them, release them to it. The people I'm hanging out with, they're never going to go to those places. Or, if they'd go to any church, then that's great. Go to those churches. That's not the people that we're about hanging out with. We're hanging out with people who are just not going to do that sort of thing. But Joel's been great. We welcomed him, and we've got we have no money. Talk about your 5 million or whatever. We don't even have enough to pay our, I live by faith personally, and my co-minister lives by faith through the church, and we have a faith line that we have to pray in each year to pay him so he can pay his mortgage. So when we have an intern, the moment our intern is going to their weekly training and meet with their interns, and he's blessing us in that. My co-minister's starting a whole chaplaincy thing around our secondary school that's being built. One of the people we're partnering with is the resource church. I don't know. I just think we're called to different things, aren't we, in different kinds of a way. So I don't know. There's a whole lot of stuff I just said then, but that's just checking out a little bit of stream of consciousness into the conversation.
Ali, can I just say that in terms of the beginning, the sort of genesis of what you're doing, it wasn't to plant a church, was it? It was, or was it? You tell us. I don't want to put words into your mouth.
Well, I had this massive charismatic experience of God saying, move to this place. I had then a vision that God was going to bring a church into being. What I also felt God saying was that I shouldn't go and proactively do that I should see where the Holy Spirit was at work, and that he would show us. and that the Holy Spirit, I believe, showed us through the people beyond the church beginning to come to faith and explore faith, and they invited us into their area. When I say into their area, I lived there, but they invited us to start a church. So at the beginning, we were called a church planting group, and that we were there for that. I guess my language and theology over the last 12 years has changed quite a lot. Outrageous.
Absolutely outrageous. How dare you? I mean, just to ask Aaron as well about the sort of expression of church in Edinburgh, maybe just tell us briefly, Aaron, your story of how you've gone about things, because I think it's linked to this.
Yeah, I mean, I just said it, amen to Ali, because very similar. So moved onto the estate where I now live in 2013 with a view to trying to help a small group of Christians from the church that I was part of. We're meeting in this local community and wanting to do something, and so we started what we called a missional community at that point. But ultimately, we were going back to the city centre church we'd all been part of to do real church, as we understood it at that point. We just did some mission and tried to do discipleship locally, and very similar. We saw local people come to faith, realised that taking them back to where we'd come from was just a cultural disconnect, and so planted a church fairly organically out of a new community of people who'd come to faith. And so for me, it was that kind of cart before the horse of, we didn't go into church plants, we went in to do mission, and church is what's formed, however many. So we actually didn't meet and have any kind of gathered expression for the first 4 years of being in the community, but we have had for the last 4 years or so. So that's some of our experience and story, I guess, of the model of how we've planted.
And Aaron and Ali, how do you feel like you're getting on? How do you feel that model is working?
After you, Ali.
I mean, I really believe in it. I mean, I hear what Paul's saying earlier, like the jury's out, isn't it? And it's not one thing over another thing over another thing. Will these guys who I don't really like using the word vulnerable. I don't really know what word to use, but on the ground, unchurched people some of whose lives have been quite difficult. Are they going to be, Christians for the rest of their lives? Is this working? I don't know. What I do see is lives changed. I see a community that's built up with an ethos. Yeah, it's not like this massive success story where I say, 3,000 came to faith every day. But what I do see is people massively having their lives. This morning I had somebody, text me, can you pray for me? She's on a journey. I've prayed for her to be filled with the Spirit in the street, and she thought I touched her. She's never come to a gathering, but God is doing something in her life. So am I seeing people's lives change? Yeah, I am. But can I say it's this massive success story? I don't know. I feel like I'm being faithful to what God's calling me to, and that is making a difference. I don't know if that's success or not.
Yeah, I think there's a key question about when we talk about success, that question that's just appeared in the chat of what is success and what are the metrics? Yeah. So much of it, I think, is guided by what we value, and then what we celebrate, and then what we perpetuate. And so if the thing that we think is the measure of success is a full church on a Sunday morning, I know as a church leader, I know the pressure and the question that people ask when they say, how's church going? What they mean is, how many people come on a Sunday morning to your thing? And so the temptation is always to shortcut to that. It's always to shortcut to, actually, if we did this and this and this, we could probably draw more people into that space. And so I think there's as a pioneer, there's actually a real tension in doing what you feel God's calling you to do, not defaulting to expectations of church. One final comment just in this part of the conversation is, I'm in Scotland, and I wish the Church of Scotland was doing half of what the Church of England is doing. I wish we were having this conversation. I wish actually that we were saying, isn't it annoying that the Church of Scotland are planting churches into our communities? Because it's just not happening. It's just not happening. And so I'm actually really thankful for this and this comment. I mean, I'm saying that as somebody who's not got a church, who's not got Ben turning up on my doorstep to do something amazing that I'd be jealous of. But I'm also thankful that that it's happening.
And that's a really helpful moment for us just to pause and segue for a second. And that is to say that our friends Paul and Ben are going to need to leave us in the next few minutes, and I didn't want them just to disappear without we paused just to say thank you so much for being with us today. We have really, really appreciated you guys sharing so openly and honestly, Ben, about your journey and what's been happening there. We want to just pray for God's continued blessing to be upon you, for his wisdom, his guidance, and his provision for you. And Paul, I want to honor you. Thank you so much for giving up time to be here. And as somebody who lives close to you, I'm not quite living, my home isn't in your parish, my church is in Ali's parish, but what I see is, you know, when I came into this area, I had a warm welcome from you, and we've had coffee together and we've had meals together. And, you know, and that's definitely the DNA that you're sharing there, because, you know, Ali, who's now on the street at the end of our street, planting from you into that space, you know, we had endeavored to have lunch together. We'd set the schedule of having lunches together every month, and then lockdown happened, so we haven't. But we've had coffee and conversation, and that sense of collaboration is clearly in the heart of what you're doing there. And we want to honor you for that too. So thank you guys for being with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah, we honor you for what you're doing. So thank you so much. Slip out when you need to, but stay for as long as you want to as well. Friends, I want to push on a little bit about so there's this definite sense of almost like shock when one of these churches appears. We've heard a little bit about different approaches to that church planting, but I want us to think about how do we cope when that happens, and whether, you know, those folks on the screen with us, you know, Roger, Simon, how do we kind of assimilate what's happening if we're in an area and a new church comes? Ali, I really appreciate what you just said. I didn't know where the story was going to go about the folks who landed up in your estate who are planting in a different way. You know, I guess for many of us, there'd be an automatic response of fear and jealousy and concern. Are my folks going to go there? What's going to happen? How do we just change gear and get into a different headspace? Simon, you haven't spoken yet. I don't know if you want to speak into this, but why don't you? And then whoever else here just wants to kind of jump in and share. How do we change our heads in that thinking in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say that this whole conversation about with the focus on resource church is one. Well, I'd like to talk about contextual mission. I like to talk about how can we do incarnational ministry when people are parachuted into a context. It is about building relationship over the long term and what have you. But I, as a regional minister, have seen things done well in terms of relationships as churches come in to new areas. I've seen situations where that hasn't happened, and what I have seen is in an area of new housing, there was a long. It took 15-20 years for this new development to come about, and as a regional minister, part of an ecumenical conversation about how we were going to do it and how we were going to work in partnership, and then an independent church that was part of a local network of conservative evangelical churches basically parachuted in, talked to the developers and went straight in. And the response to that by the other churches has been one of generosity, one of saying, actually, there's room for both of us. The mission field is big enough, particularly if we focus beyond those that might come to inherited models of church, those that we're seeking to reach in communities that aren't going to connect or easily with church. Just thinking, actually, let's work in partnership. Let's be generous. Let's try and build relationship where we can. And I mean, I guess the challenge is a theological conversation. You know, you've got some ecumenical networks where there's churches together and working through that. Sometimes there's momentum in those things. Sometimes they sort of hinder momentum. Then there are sort of new church networks that are quite active, intentional and missional, and yet they leave some people out who have a long heritage of ministry to challenging communities that you know, have taken a long time to invest in over a number of years, and they're ignored in that process. I think just being a generosity of spirit is a very good place to start.
I'm just picking up on I'm going to flip them around. Danny made a couple of interesting comments. One was, if 38% of folks are transfer growth, and that means for every 38 people leaving a church to join a new church, 62 are getting saved. And so he said, isn't that just a great return on investment in the churches? That's one way of looking at it. And should the question be, how can we be generous and support and encourage resource churches? I don't know what any of you want to say about that.
Well, isn't that presuming that the 38% who go to the new church are actually supposed to be going there? They're called there. That God has sent them there. When in fact they could actually go somewhere else and have even greater effect. Just a quick.
Okay, thanks for that, friends. I really appreciate that. Others, Ali, Yinka, Simon, Roger.
Just one overall comment, Jonathan. I'm looking at the latest stats from Peter Brierley and of church decline, and they are scary. You know, we need to really take that, you know, to heart. Across Greater Manchester, 3 million people, and the Anglican diocese is the decline rate was really shocking to me. So, you know, thank God that as has been said, is that actually the Anglicans are actually responding to this. You know, we've had a resource church set up in Salford, a resource church going to go to Rochdale. Rochdale is really, really needy at the moment in terms of church. Thank God they're going to Rochdale. So, you know, so I think there is a whole other side to this. And we do need to really take the attitude that says, what is the best for this city or this town? Because do we need more people? Yes, we do. There's whole loads of issues. I agree. You know, and things could be approached and done better, and we need to learn that. And I think there's a national conversation with the Anglican authorities as well to say, guys, when you are going into a place, could you teach your guys certain ways of approaching this? It would really, really help. Because, you know, let's work together. We are too small not to work together. Yeah. Seriously, we're too small. And as Ali said, it will be, you know, it would take so many different types of church, Christian expressions to reach the population we're trying to reach. And we live in Wythenshawe on a council estate. I think there's only one church in the whole of Manchester I could take them to, and that's in Salford. So I can't even take them there. So, you know, we've got to do the neighbourhood thing, of course. But we need so many different types of church expression.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think what I'd be concerned about is getting really upset about folk who are trying to do something. I think absolutely there needs to be conversations, and folk coming in need to do those conversations well, because there's nothing quite like, you know, you're struggling to build a community and then suddenly half of them are gone. So, you know, those things need to be treated carefully, because you're talking about people's hearts and people's lives. So anything that would help the conversation on the ground will help. But Peter Brierley, I mean, I was in Scotland a couple of years ago before this COVID stuff, and I was speaking to a Church of England minister, and who was telling me that and it was in the press the very next day, actually, in one city, half of the churches were being shut down, and there were churches of a certain type. And I think one of the big elephants in the room is, you know, when I hear what Ben has to go through in terms of the resources he's given, whatever type of church, whatever type of church that he's they're planting, whatever expression of church is, whatever language you want to use, you know, they're quantifying what success looks like. And I think that is a real challenge to us, because, you know, whilst I don't want to be defined by somebody else's success, but what is success in my own case? What does it mean for me in the mission God has called me to do to be successful? And I think we shy away from that a little bit in our Baptist circles. And I'd love to hear more people, you know, not being defined by others, but defining what success looks like to them.
And well, two things. I think Ali wants to come in. She's kind of been eager to get in, but I think we definitely need to come back to this in the last part of our conversation, which needs to start soon, really, which is, what does this say to us as Baptists? For me, I just want to linger for a second. I don't know if Ali's going to speak to this or not. Forgive me. Come in anyway, even if you're not going to. But for me, it's that, how do we build the resilience that sees a strong network so that we can sustain that? I'm holding back on reflecting on Wolverhampton, which Roger, I think, knows a fair bit about Wolverhampton, because that was a network that I was involved with. It was a super resilient place and was incredible at welcoming new work. But Ali, you wanted to come in. I know you did.
Sorry if this is coming in appropriately. Just a few things really from what came up. I thought what Roger said was interesting about the Peter Brierley figures, but what interests me in that is they were measured on who was in a church gathering on a particular day. And I guess I want to kind of question that. If you looked at who was gathering with us on any particular day, that would give a very different figure from how many people have come to faith or are on a journey of faith. So I think that's something we've really, so for me, that's a really big thing. I think it was really good earlier that somebody mentioned the word jealous. I think we need to put it out there. That's part of our sinful nature. And I think we need to repent of it. I need to repent of it. You know, when Joel and Kath were moving in to they're not so much the issue actually. But when they were moving in, we were like, okay, so what does this look like if we've got these guys moving in into our estate? And I had to repent of any of those feelings. That's not right. These are my brothers and sisters in Christ. We want to see people come to faith. So I think we do have to name that and name it to one another. So we name it to the other churches. You know, sometimes I feel a bit threatened about this. Let's just be honest and put it out there. And so for me, there's something about the kind of lead denomination model. So within new housing areas, I work across the denominations and go, right, there's this amount of new housing in the town. Who's going to do this bit and who's going to do that bit? And can we really go, right, be blessed Anglicans, be blessed Methodists, be blessed Vineyard, whatever. And we'll do this, you know, we all do this bit. And can we do that in whole towns where we go, right, well, Ben's obviously doing this great thing with students, you know, is there some people who are on the council estate doing a fab kind of really grassroots things there? How do we go for the body of Christ together? If I'm an ear, I want to bless the person who's a nose. And can we have those, or do we all feel like to be successful, we've all got to do the whole lot of everything? What might that look like to have those sort of honest conversations?
I think that's a great question to ask. And I just want to steer, as if I may, to sort of transition into the third section of our conversation, which is to do more specifically with how this impacts upon the denomination which most of the people on the screen find themselves in, which is the Baptist denomination. I can hear you all cheering even behind your mute buttons. And I just a couple of questions, because I mean, of our contributors this afternoon, the majority are accredited Baptist ministers, and therefore I would assume that there's some allegiance to a certain flavour there of the way things should be done. So what I mean, I'd just be interested to know what are you guys thinking about church planting, about missional development? I'm asking some fairly generic questions here, but I worry about our denomination. I worry about our faithfulness to a certain type of ecclesiology when our missiology isn't functioning like it should. But let me just stop right there and just Simon, let me start with you.
Yeah,
because you look like you've got an intelligent answer to give on this.
Well, I think, I mean, I along with Roy Searle, have co-facilitated Mission Forum, which is a place where regional team leaders and specialist team members from the national resource come together, and we have tried to have strategic conversations in that forum. And so when the question is asked, what is the Baptist strategy on something, I guess I want to ask the question back, what is your strategy on that as individual Baptist ministers, as individual churches? Because it's very easy to look to specialist teams nationally or regional teams association level and say, oh, well, that's where strategy comes from. And I think, you know, I hear the ecclesial conversation that actually, you know, we are a different type of church body than the Anglican Church that can make a decision nationally, invest huge amounts of money, and put a strategy into place by, you know, planting a church in university towns or wherever. I mean, it's worth saying that the home mission budget is equivalent to an average diocese budget. You know, the entire £4 million that the home mission target is equivalent only to a diocese. So, but there are strategies. So over the last few years as Mission Forum, we've invested, for example, in the developing of a missional leadership formation pathway, which is going to be launched at Spurgeon's in September, and that work is going to be available to other. We're going to sort of publicise this more later, but we've been investing in preparing leaders for missional leadership, not just for shepherd and teacher role, but for the apostolic, the prophetic, the evangelistic function and graces in churches. There's a conversation going on about the resources that are released into the Baptist family when churches are closed, and about how to use those resources for mission, both nationally and within associations. So there are strategic conversations, but they happen in Baptist ways. It is about, I think, the Baptist conversation about strategic mission is not about buildings and clergy and stipend. It is about people and faith and action. And how do we release our movement, our Baptist movement, to be people that are starting new congregations? And I believe a significant strategic question we have to ask is about multi-congregational churches as Baptists. How do we become churches that are networks of congregations in all sorts of contexts? And how do we do that well? For me, that's one of the biggest strategic conversations we need to have, not how do we replicate a resource church planting model, but that's a personal view.
And I would agree with Simon on that. I mean, that's exactly what we're doing in Reading at the moment at the Gate. So at the Gate, we're now in 3 locations. The Anglicans were really kind to us. They sold us one of the buildings, and that houses our education centre and our nursery, as well as a community. In fact, it's become the centre of Calcutta, the community in Calcutta. The local authority, the West Berkshire local authority, when 3 authority areas have deemed it as being a central point for the community. Plus, we're also in Tylehurst, and we're also in the east of Reading now, in Sutton. So I think collaboration is critical. Whatever church model we have, and whatever labels, and I know as Baptists we're very particular about our labels, we don't want to be pigeonholed, but whatever language we use or whatever labels we have, the reality of it is, at the end of the day, we want to see people meet Jesus Christ and be saved. Yeah. And that, if we can do it collaboratively, we're going to have greater success than trying to do it on our own, which our history is telling us. All you have to do is look at some of our churches and the struggles we're going through. A pastor comes into a new situation and he's expected to be Jesus. I mean, how can a pastor transform the church on his own without the help of others? It's not possible. So the more we can model as leaders collaboration, the more likely we're going to be successful at whatever God has called us to do in our context. So I agree with Simon. I think I would love to see more churches working, more Baptist churches. I'm very, very much got a Baptist shirt on. More Baptist churches working together to see better outcomes.
I'm going to jump in. Do you think that there is something in our culture that when a pastor lands in a church, she thinks that her responsibility straight away is to that church, and that there's something in the church which has captured our independence rather than interdependence? I mean, I can see any pastor coming into a church and, her priorities are not going to be, if you take a typical Baptist model, build a network in my region, and so is there something even a step backwards in terms of training that needs to be talking about our networks as well and networking?
Yeah, I would say yes. And I think one of the things that Fresh Streams model really well is so we have a separation in some ways between local ministry and regional ministry. The translocal ministry isn't rooted in the local, and I think that the fact that Fresh Streams has local ministers working translocally together to facilitate the network is something that's really important. I mean, that's quite, again, speaking personally, that I think our models of regional ministry don't necessarily help us in this regard. I think it's good to set people apart for a particular purpose, but I think sometimes having a translocal ministry rooted locally is really important.
I agree with that, Simon. I think you mentioned Fresh Streams. I wonder if we could bring in Andy Glover just for a minute. Andy, just tell us a little bit, I think, about the way Fresh Streams are operate. Well, I say they, I mean we really. How are things going? What sort of way are we wanting to work in terms of building kingdom?
Yeah, thank you. Really interesting conversation. Really learning a lot, listening, and loads of great questions as well in the chat. I think this is a conversation that's going to last more than 90 minutes, isn't it? I think that's the main thing to say, particularly for us as Baptists. I think that Fresh Streams, gosh, we are a relational network. I think that's probably the key thing I would want to say is how do we build that relational capital that we seem to have lost so much across the wider Baptist world. And I guess that's the challenge, isn't it? When you've got an institutional model, and it does some things really well. So the institution does do some things really well, not least in the pandemic, that the resources that they put out and the information they put out has been second to none.
Yeah.
But we don't seem to do the relational very well, and therefore we fall short then, don't we, of some of these things that we're talking about in terms of strategy, in terms of policy, in terms of one local Baptist church isn't going to have a strategy to reach its city or its region. It has to be done in partnership, and I guess that's what Fresh Streams is trying to facilitate at some level. It's not easy. I've been a Baptist minister for over 25 years, and that into that sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Independent spirit, where every local church is autonomous, and we don't have a bishop who then says, hey, in this city I'm going to plant a resource church, therefore I'm going to move this person or ask this person to do this. We just don't do that, and I don't want us to do that either. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to be an Anglican in that sense, bless them. I'm Baptist by conviction, but somehow that relational strategy is, I don't know, and I don't know if Fresh Streams can help, building the relationships. I appreciate what Simon says. I believe that translocal and local has to somehow connect, and I think once you get into regional ministry, if you're not careful, the disconnect comes quite quick. So I'm a great believer in trying to do national and local, but that's challenging as well. I don't know if that helps.
Thanks, Andy. I really appreciate that. I wonder if, just asking Roger, from your vantage point as a Baptist minister who's worked with the Evangelical Alliance and Gather, what are you seeing as the sort of potential Baptist contribution in a much wider vision than just local church?
I think one of the main Baptist contributions, certainly in the context of working together for a town or a city, is that the Baptists are often they're great connectors actually between different denominations. Baptists are able to sit, I think, and hold hands with the charismatic side, the Pentecostal side, but also actually able to cross over onto more established Church of England or Catholic or Methodist contexts. I think Baptists offer that sort of midway point, actually, which I think is always quite a crucial position to be in. And a lot of our unity movements, interestingly, are led by Baptists like Andy and Sue. And I think it enables that to happen. Baptists bring something quite unique, I think.
I mean, we are a grassroots movement, aren't we? Well, at least theologically speaking, we're a bottom-up movement. So could we say this is a sort of, our time has come, particularly as we sort of re-emerge, and there's this hunger for community, and for us all to be, part of something. I'll just stick with you, Roger. Is there great hope for us?
Bless you. Well, there better be, because we've got a country in dire crisis here. We're just coming out of a crisis. We're now about to go into a 5 to 10 year recovery period. Yeah. People's lives are shot. I've had 2 attempted suicides just in a group of 8 houses here. Our young people, our businesses, the unemployment figure, the mental health issues. We are coming out of a world war. And we need to play our place, take our place in that. Baptists bring something, but so does everybody else. And we've got to get our act together a bit more. And I love the fact of the independence, but I don't know why we've always managed to be less than the sum of our parts. That's always been my frustration being a Baptist. It just feels like we're always less than the sum of our parts. And I think if we could just, and Andy says it right, really, it is the relational side to this. We're not an institution, and sometimes we play it trying to be an institution, when the truth is we are a bunch of people. We either relate or we don't relate to each other. And that to me is, but our cities and our towns need us to relate. They actually need us to get our act together. And for such a time as this, this is another opportunity, Mark.
Yeah,
somebody's asked the question, you know, have we just raised a load of answers here and we need part 2 to this conversation to draw the threads together with some answers? I don't know. I want to pick up on 2 things which perhaps relate together. There's been a bit of chatter, a really good conversation with people like Rich and Ellis and Sarah talking about the inner life of ministers. And it touches on what Ali, I think it was me that said jealousy early on, and Ali picked up on that. But is there actually something that needs to happen in the heart of many of us in ministry, which is to deal with that jealousy stuff and to deal with that, I get my worth and my value from the number of people who are in my building on a Sunday, that will free us? And alongside that, I want you to speak to, if you would, is what we need to be freed to as Baptists, and I'm aware that there's not just Baptists in this meeting, but as Baptists, is there a unique role for us to be what Roger spoke about, which is perhaps one of the few movements that can stand in the midst of that gap and pull those threads together? Is there something in the places where God's put us that might be uniquely Baptist, to be those who are like the cement, the kind of mortar in the walls that he wants to be building in those places? So, I mean, I'm excited by that. Yinka, I know that you think revival's coming. We're talking about this. Is the role for Baptists in that to be drawing together networks? Ali, Simon, is that what's happening here and what's happening in the heart of ministers?
So can I just say, go on, Ali.
No, go on, Simon. No, go on.
I was just going to say, Baptists are at their heart contextual. They're congregational. They're based in a local community. And I think Ali typed in the chat box, we need at this time to be deeper in the local. But and that's what's great about Baptists. But what I think we are weak at, which should be part of who we are, is being a covenanted community. We've talked about it. We need that relational piece. We need to be relating to one another. And I would also dare to say, and I might upset some Baptists saying this, we need to recognise the apostolic within that, the translocal, the people who can bring leadership, can enable strategic networks and connections and initiatives that happen beyond the local in a way that resource and encourage and catalyse the local. I think we need to be able to re-embrace that part of our Baptist life in order to flourish. It is going to be about the local. It's going to be about contextually embedded local congregations, but connected together in that way.
I just think we've got, thank you, Simon, sorry. I think we've got a huge theological freedom building up on what Roger said about who we are as Baptists, that enables us to partner all different people in different ways. I'm going to be a bit pretentious now as I'm doing my doctorate. I don't think, no, you can't actually see it, but on this little jar here in front of me, I've got a little saying that came out of a 1611 Baptist meeting that said, ubi Christus, ibe ecclesia, which is where Jesus is, there is church. And I think that we have got a huge freedom as Baptists to say, what does church look like? Who do we partner with? And how do we allow church to be birthed amongst us? That whilst I love my Anglican brothers and sisters, we don't have a bishop telling us, we have the Holy Spirit telling us that where we are partnering, be it with Anglicans, Methodists, one another as a covenant group, with housing associations, the council or whatever, that if Christ is in the midst, their church can be. And that is where I think sometimes we say, what do we mean as being dissenters all the time? And I think part of what our thing as being dissenters is we don't have to stick within a particular model that we have already or a particular way of being. We can say where Christ is, there is church. And I think that does give us a kind of a flexibility theologically to connect with anyone else who is saying, we're up for this, where Christ is, there's church. So
thank you.
That's my little bit of pretension back to 16.
No, that wasn't pretentious. That was beautiful, I think, actually. Jonathan, do we just get a sort of final word from our because I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, I think let's do that. I tell you where I want to finish. I want to finish with Yinka, if that's okay. So if we draw these threads together, and I'm aware of the time, obviously we're going to speak at the end, Mark and I, just to say some thank yous, but I want to go Roger, Ali, Simon, then Yinka. And is Aaron still here? It looks like Aaron had to go. Oh, no, Aaron's still there as well. Let's get Aaron in on a spotlight if we can as well, please. And so let's go Roger, Ali, Simon, Aaron, and then Yinka. Just a final word on this, drawing a thread together, something we need to learn as a result of the conversation. Go on, Roger.
Bless you. I think we need to learn as much as we can from other traditions. And we need to ask ourselves, where do I see Jesus in this place? It may not be what I do, may not be how I do it, but we will see Jesus there. And we need to learn from that. But we also need to ourselves get our own act together a bit and ask ourselves questions about our future and what we bring and how we're going to do it and how on earth we're going to be a blessing to our places.
Thank you. Ali.
Sorry, I wasn't ready. I guess if we're going to do a 30-second thing, I want us to orientate around love, what to mean for us to love, to orientate around relationship amongst one another and around partnership. That's when we can kind of all fight above our weight.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Simon.
Yeah, I think there's beauty in diversity, and to be generous towards people who are doing it differently to us and embracing that. I think embracing adventure is really important, that actually this isn't about saving the denomination, saving the church. It's about seeing the kingdom of God come, and let's throw ourselves into that bucket list Baptist, let's die trying. If that, let's not sit here and fade out quietly, let's die trying. And it all starts with the mission of God. Let's not start with church. Let's start with the mission of God and see what church emerges as we do that.
Thank you, Simon. I really, really appreciate that. And Aaron?
Yeah, as an Englishman in Scotland, my takeaway is that we're better together. So, something about collaboration, I think, is my takeaway. What if we made it our vision to serve other people's vision? That's my takeaway.
Thank you. Now, I'm not a particularly hierarchical person, but we do have the president of Baptist Together with us, and so it just seems like a moment to learn and to kind of recognise a bit of apostolic authority among us as well. And if you want to come back on me on that another time, email me with your complaints about me, suggesting that Yinka might have some authority. But Yinka, just some final thoughts from you.
Yeah, you know what we say in Africa, of course, it's president for life. Anyway, look, we are led by the most amazing prophetic leader, Lynn Green. She is prophetic. She is absolutely a woman who hears from God and speaks out of what she sees, not what's before her, but what she sees in God. I think there's a revival coming to the Baptist movement. I think there's a renewal coming to our Baptist family. And, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it's the power of God unto salvation for everybody who believes. And so, at the end of the day, we all want to help people find Christ. We want people to be saved. I think because of our diversity, the fact that we can have an Ali and we can have an Andy and we can have an Aaron and we can have a Tim, we're also diverse. If we can just get the gospel out in the ways that Christ is asking us to do it, I think we've got more than a chance of transforming society. Think about the Baptist Missionary Society. Think about the Baptists that have transformed the world. We just need to have a little bit more confidence in ourselves and to understand we don't need a big box if we've got Jesus. We just need a clear call from heaven and an anointing that breaks the yoke that lies before us. So I'm really excited. I think we're on the edge of an outpouring of the Spirit on the Baptist family, and I just can't wait to see it happen.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Yinka. Really appreciate you and for being here. You mentioned Lynn a moment there, and Lynn would have loved to have been with us. She sent her apology. She sent messages kind of supporting. She unfortunately is in another meeting, otherwise would have been here. And so she encourages us to kind of carry on with the conversation, would have been here. We're really grateful to all of those who shared with us, but also to the rest of you for being here, for being part of this conversation in the chat. Mark, I don't know, what do you think? Have we started something that we haven't finished well, or have we got some stuff here that's really helpful?
I think we've got some stuff that's helpful. I think we're probably all zoomed out, mind, but how we take it forward, maybe this is the beginning of a conversation which may filter through into other spaces. We'll wait and see. And
the folks we've had in the room with us today are people who influence this conversation for us as Baptists.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've fed into that.
And we're happy with feedback. If people want to contact you and I, that'd be great.
That's really good. If you've enjoyed it today and you want to encourage us, then the email address is Jonathan. And then if you have problems and issues, then talk to Mark. That'd be great. And let him have the complaints and me the praise, because that's just how we're wired.
Yeah, if you've got problems with Jonathan, speak to me.
It's been great today. Thank you, friends, for joining us. We did organize this at fairly last minute kind of stuff. And I want to just acknowledge this is the first time that Fresh Streams and Baptist Ministers in the UK Facebook group have done something together like this. So we're learning too, and I guess it's not going to be the first time we have not going to be the last time that we have one of these conversations. So we'll be looking out for other opportunities. If you are part of those groups and think it'd be good for us to do this in another subject, then please do let us know. We haven't got a series planned or anything, but it's just been a really good thing to do together.
Be good to pray, wouldn't it?
It really would. Mark, could you lead us in prayer then?
Yeah, that would be good. Let's pray together. If you're of a charismatic persuasion like me, you may even want to lift your hands. Father, thank you so much for your goodness to us. We want to be faithful to the mission of God. We want to be led by the Spirit. We want to learn from one another. We pray that you'll continue to lead us, particularly at this time when we begin to emerge from this global pandemic. Give us eyes to see and ears to hear what the Spirit's saying. May we have that combination of both humility and courage to move forward. I thank you for my sisters and brothers on the screen here. And I just want to pray the blessing of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit to be upon each of us, for we ask it in your name. Amen.
Amen. A special thank you as well to David and to Tim, who've been co-hosting with us. David, letting people in and out, we've really appreciated that. David's been helping me keep a focus on the chat as well, drawing things to our attention, which has been great. Tim, been hot on the spotlighting, so thank you for that. We've really appreciated it. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. God bless you, and God bless you for the rest of what you got. Take care. Bye-bye.